Good evening. Welcome to our Sunday evening live stream. I'm Douglas Warner with my producer Rob, who's going to be engaging in our chat this evening. Just want to let you know we're going to be broadcasting this live chat every Sunday from 9 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, about an hour or so online. Join us every Sunday. Tell your friends about it. And more importantly than anything, bring us your questions. What do you want to hear from us about? What questions do you have? We're going to be dealing with a lot of different topics. Um, the real meaty stuff of life. It's not a lot of frill here. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about confidence. We're talking about meaning of life. And more importantly, how to be in the experience of life effectively and joyfully. So Rob and I were going to tackle a few topics this evening, and if you're listening in, I invite you to. Well, you just kicked the camera. If you're listening in, I invite you to chat in, give us your 2 cents worth, and let us know you're there. So, Rob, what do you got tonight? Rob is healing the camera right now. This, as I said, this is our first live stream, so this is going to be a lot of tech stuff we're going to be playing around with. We may have some little dead air time. Bear with us. You're part of the story. You're part of our journey. If you're here tonight, you're seeing this thing building from the ground up. I want to remind you also that we have Douglas Warner as you know, is the YouTube channel. There's a lot of content on there. There's a lot of videos. Some of you have probably seen a number of them. If not, go back to some of those videos. I would recommend going back to some of the earliest videos, get a real sense of the evolution of this channel and what we're trying to do with it, the kinds of things we're talking about, the ways that I'm hoping we can serve you and your life with the content we're presenting. So Rob, you there?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
I was just kind of thinking about the stuff that I've been doing this week and some stuff that's been on my mind. Um, Sorry, I'm looking at the at my notes here at the camera. We were talking this week about relationships, and it came across to me this idea about who's right or who's wrong in a relationship, and it reminded me of this quote from one of my father's friends who used to say it all the time. He'd say, "It's not about who's right, but it's about who's left." And I think
I like that.
and he was referring a lot to driving, and when someone cuts you off in traffic, you don't need to rage against them or try to cut them off, but you may be right, but if you're dead, that doesn't get you anywhere. And I've been thinking about that a lot this week in terms of relationships, and sometimes it doesn't feel right, or sometimes it doesn't look right, or sometimes it doesn't seem right, especially from someone else's perspective. But I guess that's
So
how
this
we
like
get to left. Yeah.
yeah, this idea of right and wrong in a relationship, it's tricky stuff. As I said in one of these past videos, in fact, our most recent video, I don't feel it's about being right or wrong, although it might feel like that at the moment. But you have to step back and ask, is what we're doing effective? Is this, it's kind of like what your dad said, what's left? Doesn't matter if you're right, doesn't matter if you're first, if the casualties are too high. It reminds me also of traffic. Everybody racing to the stop sign, racing to the stoplight. I got to get ahead of you, or I got what have you. Relationship is about being effective. Are we effective? One of the things that I found that really highlights that in a relationship, and maybe one of the first places that couples have to tackle that is when they have a joint challenge that's a little bit bigger than themselves. We talk about needing to be able to surrender to the relationship, and sometimes the most poignant way to surrender to the relationship is to have to pull together over an issue. Sometimes it's an economic issue. Somebody loses a job, or something happens, a devastating thing happens economically for the family, for the couple, and there's small petty differences, or they seem so monumental on Monday, and all of a sudden Tuesday morning they mean relatively little because we have to pull together. And it's not about being right and wrong or wrong here. It's about we have to get this job done. What's going to be the most effective way for us to work together to solve this? Now, I know for myself, it became super highlighted, that concept, when I started raising my children. Uh, right and wrong. My wife and I could argue forever about who's right and who's wrong, and we can pout and we can what have you, but what is going to be the best solution for the child? That really forces you to step back and look at yourself a little more objectively. It's not about me being right, because me being right may leave the kid in, in a bad way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but also economic. The decisions that you make as a couple have to be made as a couple. Learning to dance that dance, that's a hard one. We've got a lot of obstacles in our culture right now. They're making relationships really challenging. A lot of pressure, for both parties to be professionals, a lot of pressure to be successful, to meet the economic needs of a family. Even if you don't have children, the couple still has a lot of challenges. And learning to step back and be willing to surrender a little bit of your ego hold on this, your sense of me being right or me being correct. And are we effective? Are we getting the job done? Are we maintaining some sort of flow or balance here? Are we solving the family problems? Are we moving forward? Or are we just bickering all the time because we're in tug of war?
That kind of makes me feel like we talk about the self a lot, but when and how the self will tell us, what we need to know, and maybe another word is intuition, and we kind of connect with those things. But and I do that, but then I get into relationships like you're talking about where sacrifice is required, and I'm called selfish. And I feel like I'm listening to my heart and doing what's right for me, but to the other person that comes out as selfish.
Well, so there's two or three questions in there, or topics to talk about. But first of all, this idea of I feel like I'm doing right for what's for me, what you just said. I step back and I assess and I look at myself and I'm making the best move for myself. Maybe we need to take a half a step further back, give us a little bit different perspective and say, okay, not just right for me, but what is right for the relationship? Does that make sense?
I don't know. I don't know. Like,
because
I have to put myself in there before the relationship, right?
Not quite.
Okay.
First, both people in the relationship, and if this is really going to work, both individuals have to be in some level of being able to agree that the relationship is a larger entity than their individual needs all the time. I can't have everything I want, you can't have everything you want, and the relationship be nurtured equally. So there has to be an agreement that at some places, and probably more often than not, we have to evaluate, balance our personal desires, our personal feelings of need, and assess, okay, why do I want this? Why do I feel like this is important to me? How does that compare to how it's important to the relationship? Is this essential? Is this a need or a want? Am I just arguing this point because it's a firm belief and it's my opinion that I've been holding on to forever about something? Is this getting in the way of us coming together and getting the job done for the relationship? Are we moving forward with the relationship? Does that help?
I guess so. When I've been in a long-term relationship, I get what you're saying. It's pretty clear. But as I come into a relationship, I'm not. it doesn't make any sense for me to surrender to the relationship in the beginning unless it's worth surrendering to, or maybe that's the problem. Maybe I'm coming into that without the right surrender.
I think you just hit it. I think you just said it. Coming into the relationship is um, probably one of the tougher times. It's not the only tough time, but it's a really tough time because both parties you're assessing each other. If you're assessing your partner and your growing relationship to your partner, your how you feel and your opinions and all these things. One of the things, what are you assessing? How are you measuring the compatibility of this person? That, I think, is one of the biggest problems we run into. We have, I think, a relatively shallow cultural yardstick for assessing a potential partner. I think it's very surface for many people, not everyone, but for many people, it's based on economics. How much money does this person make? What do they look like? Is there sexual attraction? There all these social and economic things. But one of the things that we can improve by being able to connect with our own sense of need versus want, and being able to connect and assess our own imbalances, if you will, just stepping back in that objective self that you mentioned a minute ago, which is a big topic in this channel, by the way. Going back to some of those previous videos on the channel, we have a lot of really great discussions on what we mean by this authentic self and the ego self, these two components of the human condition. The authentic self is it's a field of consciousness that we always have access to. And it's that intuitive side. It's that place where we can just step back. And I was saying to Rob earlier, it's sort of like sitting on the couch in your inner man cave, if you're a guy watching this right now. And I can just observe a little more objectively. That's the position of the authentic self, or the objective observer. And then with the ego self is what we're talking about here now, our opinions, our thoughts, our emotions, our body. Part of us that navigates a lot of the day-to-day activities. So what happens is that we assess each other coming into a relationship. And what are we programmed to look for? Well, what do you look for? When you're looking at a relationship, honestly, you go into a relationship and what do you look for beyond the initial physical attraction? What is it? What kind of qualities are you looking for in a potential partner?
I think sometimes it goes beyond the words. I feel like in this point in my life, I'm afraid to have expectations and to say, oh, I need this or I'm looking for that, because those things that I want are not needs necessarily. They're things that I want, and I've learned that I'm not always making the right decisions when it comes to that type of stuff. But I don't. So I've instead of trying to define what I actually need, I feel like I've just kind of let all of that go, and I'm like, okay, I'll try this out and see how it works. But it's not working to do it that way either, and maybe that's a
It's what it sounds like, Rob. It sounds like this analogy I've used before, that holding on, just the right amount of holding on. You can't. We have to have we're looking for some level of compatibility, and so there is an intuitive clicking that we're looking for. If I'm holding on too tightly for an expectation, I'll smother it's like holding a small bird. I think we've used this analogy before. My fencing teacher in college told us how to teach, or rather hold the sword. So it's like you're holding a small bird. If you hold on too tightly, you crush the bird. If you hold on too loosely, it flies away. So there's that right amount of just holding on enough where you don't crush the relationship, but you don't let it fly away. And so we learn how to access that intuitive nature, that objective observer way of assessing. But we have to be really grounded in ourselves before we can really be successful in a relationship. I think there's some wonderful examples out there of people who grow together, They maybe get married young or come together at a young age, and they grow, they mature together, and that's a beautiful thing. A lot of times that just doesn't work, and so we have two sometimes emotionally maybe immature people come into a relationship. Maybe one party is a little bit emotionally immature, and you're not in sync. So I guess my point is, what are you looking for in a relationship? What is your gut telling you? You know, that intuition you talked about. You do want to listen to that, but we're instinctively wired for some things. And this reminds me of all these studies, and there's so many studies that reinforce this about what are women looking for in a man. We'll kind of reverse the thing here. And what's number one on the list for most women from these studies? We've talked about this. What's the first thing that's one or two on the list?
Sense of humor.
A sense of humor. Why?
It shows confidence. It shows intelligence. It shows ease.
Relaxed. Yeah, it means this person is holding on loosely. They're not holding on to anything so tightly they can crush it. So instinctively, a woman sees a guy with a real sense of humor, not the class clown stuff, but a real sense of humor, and they say, this guy is not losing his head. Everybody's running around like a chicken with their head cut off in this situation, but this guy, he's composed, and he's composed enough to where, and he's relaxed enough in this emergency or this scenario that he can kind of joke. He can be a little self-deprecating. That really, at a deep level, rings a bell to that woman that this guy has a real sense of himself. And if he has a sense of himself as we go through together, if we're in a relationship, if I were to be in a relationship with that guy, he's going to be able to roll. He's going to be able to adapt. He's going to be able to go with the flow of the relationship. He's not overly attached to a fragile sense of his ego. He's not panicking. He's not overreacting. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, what's the equivalent? I mean, when I think about it, it goes to a very physical thing, but what's the equivalent for what guys see in a woman? I don't know if it's.
So what's the equivalent for a guy? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, so the woman, we got the, maybe we need to start a study, Rob. Maybe this can be one of our chats. We're going to get these folks to chat in, and we're going to just organically generate a survey on our channel here. What is the equivalent for guys, the number one attractive thing in a woman? And we can sift through all of the obvious things of guys who might be chatting in on physical parts of the woman, but getting serious about this, what's that non-physical attractive point in a woman? The women are ready to say sense of humor in a guy. They're willing to overlook some physical, maybe not the best looking guy in the world, or maybe not quite the richest guy, but if he's got a sense of humor, I can navigate life with him. Now, what's the equivalent for a guy? So I'm going to ask the audience here to give us some ideas, some chat in if you can, and I'll give you one thought. It's just a thought to throw out for discussion. When I first met my wife, I asked her years ago, I said, honey, do you know what the sexiest part of a woman is? And of course, she rolls her eyes at me and expects I'm going to say something anatomical. And she said, no, what? And I said, her ears. She looked at me for a minute, and I said, yeah, a woman who can really listen to a man is really sexy. And I think that that this plays out. Now, studies have been done, a few things I've read and heard about, where men who cheat on their wives or their partners. And it's interesting that and once again, if my statistics are wrong, if the audience here has some different opinions, I'd really like to hear from you. But what they found in talking to these guys who went off reservation, it was not for the physical stuff as much. It wasn't just for the sex. In fact, the woman who was getting this guy's attention, other than the partner, whoever he was cheating with, those folks have been interviewed, and they found that no, this guy, we talked most of the time. I mean, I've read some articles. Prostitutes have said, yeah, I got a lot of guys who come in. Sometimes we don't do anything physical. They just want to talk. They want to be heard. Uh, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I come from a time in my life when so many of my friends are having families, and there is that pressure from my family and pressure from society and all that. So I think I'm supposed to be looking for a woman who would make a good mother. I think I'm supposed to be, but on the other hand, until I meet that person, I don't know if I'm inspired to have children in the first place, and so maybe that's putting the cart before the horse. Um,
Well, I think it is, Rob. I think you've got a couple things involved here. First of all, um, we've got this biological imperative that we're all born with, this procreation imperative. Then we've got this social imperative that's leveraged on us. And then we got the family, what your family's expectations are, or what your age groups, your generational expectation of what being successful is. I think right now we realize the world doesn't need more children. So we don't need to populate our family to run the family farm as you did maybe 1,000 years ago. And we don't need to populate the country or anything along those lines. So having children really is a personal choice. Uh, I think that we need to come to a place where we accept that you are not less than if you don't have children. Now, there's going to be folks in various religions that are going to argue that, or the folks that have come from some pretty strong opinion bases about that. But this is my opinion. We have to realize that having children is a personal choice, and this is where the two parties have to assess their ability to be able to surrender to a relationship. If you are with a person and you're assessing them for compatibility for making a family, that would be number one on the list. Is this person so invested in their agenda that in what they want to do, and that's the most important thing. They're not going to let go. They're not going to compromise. They're not going to come to a middle ground on anything. How are they going to come to a middle ground when it comes to raising the child? When the child becomes part of that which you need to surrender to. So what does that mean? That means as we come into a relationship, every relationship we come into becomes a self-reflective tool of where we are in our own journey for maturation and for balance and for self-awareness. Does that make sense?
it kind of.
Okay. Well, first of all, I can't be right for somebody else if I'm not right for me. If I'm not balanced, I'm not going to go into a relationship expecting the other person to balance me. Okay. That you can't.
Yeah, I get that.
Now that doesn't mean balance. That doesn't mean perfect. Okay. Nobody's going to be perfect. But are we coming into a relationship? Basically, are we working on our own stuff? Are we aware of our own stuff? We get two people who have a level of awareness of themselves. Let's say that. There's a compatibility. We both are working from, we have a pretty commensurate awareness of ourselves. Again, that sense of humor is a reflection of a level of self-awareness. And do we have that growing self-awareness? If you have one person who's completely clueless and the other person who has been working on themselves for quite a while, this could be a struggle. One's going to be feeling like they're raising the other one. I've got 2 children now. How many women I've heard said, I'm raising 2 kids, my husband and my child. Sometimes the guy says that, but a lot of times I hear women say that. I feel like I'm raising 2 kids. This is why it's so important early on in our lives that our kids learn age appropriately, but learn these basic techniques of learning how to connect with that intuitive side, give it credibility, learn how to start to create balance as they grow, not just caving into every whim that they have, every little fluctuation of their ego identity, getting better and better at just stepping back and looking at the group, looking at what not just my personal needs are, but what are the needs of my family? What are the needs of my community? once upon a time, this is how kids were trained. I mean, this is part of most indigenous people I'm familiar with, I've read about and heard about. They raise their children with that level of growing consciousness and awareness, and they were enculturated to have that awareness, and there was ritual and ceremony and um, tribe or clan based education, if you will. They were informed by their elders, and they're formed by those who have come before them. What does it mean to be a man in this culture? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean, first and foremost, to be a human being? Our culture has failed us. Our culture has failed us. We have not enculturated us in any way in this. From at this point where we are now, the minute you're born and you can turn on a television or nowadays a computer, you are a consumer. You are a potential source for purchasing. You're not being enculturated adequately. We are not being enculturated adequately from early on in our lives to have a sense of ourselves. In fact, the more immature we can be, the more easily we can be sold to. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. The more immature we can be, and that immaturity is supported in so many areas of our culture, whether it's the media or
Yep.
education or
Look at the name of some of our magazines. Me. I mean, and it's very egocentric, if you will, and your personal needs. Not just your needs, but what do you want right now? You shouldn't have to wait for it, Rob. You should be able to get exactly what you need right now. Push the button. Now, I'm telling you, I've raised two kids. They're both adults, and I have a grandchild. I have a granddaughter, and that's exactly what we're trying to teach her not to do. Not to feel like I want this right now and give it to me right now. I deserve it. We're trying to teach her that's not balanced. That's not appropriate. That's not moving you in the direction of being.
Well, it's not in control.
It's not in control of herself, right? But yet our culture moves against that, and we're at odds with that.
See, I guess it's okay if we take the case of children, and they're not in control of themselves, and we teach them these skills, and we want them to have a sense of self. And on one hand, we're teaching them that, and then on the other hand, though, we're teaching them this. Um, you got to do well in second grade so that you do well in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade, and it goes on,
Yep.
and then you get a job, and you got to do great in college so you get that great job, and then you work, you work until retirement.
Yep.
And that why are we teaching our children to try to find themselves, but not our?
We're not teaching. We
lose that for ourselves when we get older.
We're not teaching our children to find themselves. Not as a culture. I can't speak to what happens in every home. But as a culture, we don't have a supported mechanism to teach our children how to be human. What does it mean to be a human being? You're going to get as many definitions as people you ask. What does it mean to be a man or a woman in this culture? You're going to get, again, as many answers as you ask people. What we are defined at, though, consistently as being consumers from early age. I mean, on YouTube here, we've had these discussions. What are the most successful channels? The ones that appeal to
makeup
and children.
Yeah, makeup and children. Yeah.
Okay, which is fine, but why do we teach our kids the way we teach them? Because it keeps the machine rolling. We're not, when I taught middle school, actually it was my first year teaching was fifth grade, and I asked my kids, I write words on the board, and words that seemed to be the same meaning, but in actuality had differences. And one of the pairs of words I put up was education versus training. What's the difference? Because sometimes we use those two words interchangeably. And for those young minds, it really got some very interesting responses. And they kind of intuitively understood that training was to train you to do a specific task or series of tasks. Whether it's training you how to be a car mechanic or training you how to be a brain surgeon, it's still training. On the other hand, education had a broader definition, and it was teaching you how to think critically, teaching you how to be a balanced human being in your culture. And this is what education was meant for. And unfortunately, it's really hard to monetize or directly see the monetization of education versus the monetization of training. So what has education defaulted back to, has regressed to? No longer is our country being led, or the nation being led, or even any of our local governments by the philosopher king of the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, where the king's training, if you will, or his education or her education was well-rounded, so they had perspective. So they had breadth and depth of knowledge. Now we have specialists, and training produces that because it's monetized. So this early education that the culture is supposed to be giving us on the basics of just how to live. I give you a really good example. I have a client of mine who was a pain management specialist. He's an MD, local hospital, and he came to me to learn how to breathe for breath work. And I teaching yoga breath work, and he said, Doug, I went to med school and I went all the postgraduate training I had, and he said they taught us everything about the respiratory system and all the anatomy and all the physiology and the biochemistry and what have you about breathing, but the one thing they never taught us was how to breathe, which I thought was ironic because we're teaching our children through the education system a lot of mechanics of how this and that works, but we're not teaching them how to live.
Can we teach that in school?
You can teach it through your culture. The first place the children learn it is at home. And our parents, this is a deep dive on the culture here. The first place they have to learn this is from hopefully two balanced individuals who came together with that level of awareness that we talked about a few minutes ago. They came together with a certain balanced awareness of themselves, able to surrender to a relationship and grow through that. So when it comes to raising their children, they have been through this process themselves. And it has to start, as again, that this is not new. This is not something that the human species has never done in history. It was done for thousands and thousands of years up to a point. It was done through most indigenous cultures. They taught their children, how to be humans, how to interact, what your role was as a man, what your role was as a woman. And the interesting thing is in those cultures, the woman and the man were equal. The idea of equality wasn't even in the mix, because it was like asking you, well, which hand do you like better, the left hand or the right hand? Not which one are you better with, but well, that's a kind of it's a nonsensical question. These are my hands, they work together. And this idea of equality between the sexes in most of the more original cultures was not the issue. What was it to be a human being, and your role in the group, in the family, in the tribe, in the clan, what have you? What was your responsibility to others? We're in an upside down time. Where we are now, a lot of folks would say all of our mores, all of our values are flipped upside down. We're very focused on ourselves and what I want, what I should get right now, what I deserve, and I'm not responsible for. It's not my fault that I'm the way I am. We don't have as much of a sense of social responsibility. If I don't have a sense of responsibility to my partner, then how can I ever expand my sense of responsibility to a larger group? We don't see our connections, our overlap.
I think we don't even see that sense of responsibility to ourselves a lot of times.
Well, we don't hold ourselves responsible.
Yeah.
We want to take credit. We want to take credit when there's a success, but we don't want to take credit. We want to blame when there's a failure. This is an immature but natural human reaction, but it's an immature reaction. This is when you raise kids and you start to see them. Well, it wasn't my fault. No, you have to teach children. Sometimes you have to teach them how to take responsibility for their actions. I mean, raising my kids, I know myself. When I was 5 years old, I had to be taught as well.
I was talking to a friend the other day at a party about when children learn to lie, and it's an interesting kind of time in their lives when they figure out that they can get out of something by just saying saying something else, and
Yeah,
I guess that's a pattern that we pick up, and it's a good skill to have, I guess, too.
yeah, but that's an interesting point. This idea of this ability to be deceitful. Um, I grew up Catholic, and I remember the first documented lie I took. I said I was in kindergarten, first day of kindergarten, and Catholic kindergarten, and I came home from school for my first day, and my mom said to me, "Well, how did school go?" And I said, well, it was okay, but um, somebody got sent had to stand behind the piano with tape on their mouths because they wouldn't stop talking. She said, "Really? Yeah, who was that?" And I said, "Mom, I don't know. I don't know everybody's name yet. It's the first day of school." Well, obviously it was me. I was the It was me. I didn't lie. I think at that point my parents thought I should go to law school, but I simply sort of didn't tell the truth. That's it. So about a half an hour later, I was in my room and I heard Douglas Andrew. I knew somebody had ratted me out, and one of my friends had told their parents, and my mom got the phone call. So that was my first documented lie. But in these, I remember growing up in the um, Catholic religion, and there was this idea of the age of reason. When was it possible to sin? How old did you have to be to actually um, commit a sin? And they said some magic. I don't know what it is nowadays. When I was growing up in the '60s, it was 7 years old. That was when you reached this age of reason. I have a feeling I might have gotten it a little earlier than seven. I think at least by five, I was pretty good at lying there. But what does that reflect? I think it reflects that ability. At that point, you have the ability to step back out of the situation and consciously tell an untruth, which means at that age, whatever it is for that person, it could be five, it could be seven, it could be four, it could be, I don't know. But let's just use that magic. Let's say five, since I kind of broke the rule. That in some way I had the ability to sit back and connect in some way with that objective observer part of myself, assess the situation, and be responsible for telling the lie. It wasn't just a reaction, but it was thought out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Therefore, that would have been okay. Yeah, now you're responsible. Now you're responsible. So now it's possible for you to lie wittingly. And so that's that two-edged sword. Yeah, well, connecting with the objective observer, being able to sit back and look at myself, it makes me really responsible. Doesn't just make me aware, but now I'm ultimately responsible because I have taken this other set of eyes, this new perspective, and I can assess the situation. And if I choose at that point to go off reservation, then I definitely am responsible.
Okay, we are. We may be responsible, but I guess we need to be a little bit more fair with ourselves. I'm thinking back on the channel we had said maybe one time there's that three-part test to things, and is it causing harm? Is it true?
Mm-hmm.
Does it need to be done or said, or does the action need to be taken? And we talked about that idea, and I use that all the time. I find it really helpful in so many different areas. But sometimes I get to that point, where I ask myself those questions, but I'll still do what I'm, was going to do, even if it doesn't pass that test. I mean, unconsciously.
Sure. That just means you consciously, you're responsible for your action. Here, what you're speaking of, and maybe for our audience is just to refresh their memory. um, in a mindfulness practice, in order to be a little less reactive and a little bit more directive in a response, responding to a situation rather than reacting. Um, Mindfulness in speech would be using those three things that Rob just talked about. If, and this was me for most of my life, I was the quick response, the quick tongue, the one to come back with a sharp remark. But when you're in a conversation or an argument or something, and somebody said something, and you're ready to come back with that cutting remark, to pause. This is part of the mindfulness process. To pause and ask yourself three questions: Is what I'm about to say, is it going to cause harm? Number two, is what I'm going to say true to the best of my knowledge? And number three, is what I'm about to say, does it even need to be said? Or at least, do I need to say it right now? And these are, that does a lot of things there. It makes you stop, sit back in the chair of the observer. You're out of the heat of the moment. You just got out of the little bubble you were in of reaction. You stepped out, you sat in the easy chair of the observer, and said, okay, I'm looking at the situation, I'm about ready to say something, and I ask those three questions. Now, if I come to the conclusion, or say I'm still going to say it, then you did it mindfully. Now, the chips fall where they may, but you did it less reactively, and that's the key there. Part of the maturity process is to be able to do that mindfully, less reactively. Now, over time, you'll see how this plays out, and over time, it'll become evident that probably didn't make the best choice on that last time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's not so much the decision you made right then. The fact that the starting place is to do it less reactively.
So it doesn't. So in the beginning, it's not about actually changing my actions. It's about changing my perspective.
Exactly. The first, that you can't change your actions. You don't have control over your actions unless you change your perspective. We're consistently reacting. If we're reacting out of our emotions and our thoughts, those components of the ego self, and that's where our direction is always coming to navigate, to make decisions, and navigate the world, it's going to be reactive for the most part. We need to be able to step back and objectively assess the situation and make decisions. But you can't hope to make those more balanced decisions until you change your perspective. Otherwise, the decisions you make are going to be all over the map. Sometimes they're going to be balanced, sometimes they're not. You don't have a consistent vantage point to make decisions effectively unless you sit back and connect with the objective observer to do that. Over time, it plays out. Sometimes we need the evidence of time. Every time I sit back and I see it, and I just get sucked into that emotion again, and I make that decision. But we get better and better at trusting what our intuition tells us, trusting what the objective perspective is telling us. In the beginning, we may not trust it. We may see it, and we're just maybe not strong enough. We still succumb to that appetite, or we succumb to that anger, or to that resentment, or to that lust, or whatever it is, that addiction. But over time, we get better and better at just stepping back and observing, and progressively, the decisions will start to change, start to morph, start to align.
I think we got a question here on the live chat.
Okay, I'm not seeing that. What do we got? You with me?
Yeah.
I don't see anything. I'm not
You don't see the live chat?
I don't see anything, no.
No? Okay. Well, it asks, how do I know if I have the correct perspective if it seems to be changing? I mean, like, today I'll have the perspective of, yeah, this person is so great, and she's my sweetheart, and, we're going to be, I want everything to be the best it can be between us, and then tomorrow I have the perspective of, wow, I dodged a bullet, How do I know which one is? I mean, those are perspectives, right? Or is that a different
It's a
perspective?
totally different perspective.
Okay.
You're looking at the other person. The perspective is, where am I figuratively sitting, if you will, as I look at the situation? Am I in the bubble or out of the bubble? So some of these basic exercises, when I teach people, and which I have done in a number of these videos that are on the channel, when I teach people to start to develop this objective observer perspective, we have to start very simple, because once you are able to click in, if you will, to sit in the seat of the observer, you'll go, oh, that's what it is. So jumping right into trying to learn that skill, to look at through that vantage point and jump into a relationship question or a big life question, that can be tricky because we're confused. What do you mean by perspective here? Is it how I'm looking at this for? Yes, today, I love you, I love you, I love you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. That seems to change, right? So my perspective seems to be changing. No, it's not. Your vantage point is still the same. You're looking through from one place, from one point. And usually you're responding, reacting out of emotions, thoughts and emotions. You're not stepping back into another level of consciousness. The objective observer is another level of consciousness. So in order to get better at that, there's some real basic exercises we would do. Once again, there's a process. I have developed a process, a 4-step process called the PATH. It stands for pause, assess, take action, and heal. And it's all laid out in a number of videos on this channel. But just to synopsize is that it's a 4-step process to do just this. Learn to simply stop, drop back, draw your awareness inward, and then progressively connect. Just look at yourself in real time from that objective observer perspective. We're just looking at ourselves. We're just looking at ourselves. And we get better and better at looking at ourselves. Something maybe as simple as just observe your breath. Just observe your thoughts. Well, how is that different? I'm stepping back and I'm looking at me thinking. I'm looking at my thoughts. I have to ask, who's looking at the thought? The observer's looking at the thought. We get this, we start to see, oh wow, I've changed my perspective. I'm not looking outside, looking through the thought, through the filter, or through the gauze of that thought or emotion. I'm stepping back and looking at myself, looking at it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a skill set. It doesn't just snap on one day for most of us. We build this ability to objectively observe ourselves. And we start with the small things. Observe your breath, observe your body. How do you feel? I don't know. Well, step back and feel it. Oh, this is my body. This is my breath. These are my thoughts. This is my emotion right now. What's getting my attention the most? What's throwing me off balance? These are the steps of the PATH process. And this is why I developed this PATH process, simply as a way to connect with the objective observer and train yourself to be able to shift consciousness, levels of consciousness, and look at your thoughts. Just objectively look at your emotions. And then we can make assessments. We can choose actions at that point. That's how we choose right action, if you will. Not as right or wrong, but in the sense we're talking about balanced or imbalanced action. If I'm reacting out of my emotions, yesterday, I thought this woman was the most amazing woman in the world, but she really pissed me off tonight, and so I think she's the worst woman in the world. Well, that's clearly not an objective perspective. You're looking at you're looking at her through the dark glass of your emotion at the time. But your ability to, in the moment, to say, you know what, my emotions are clouding me. Let me sit back. Let me step back and get a different perspective and look at, why am I having that emotion? Why am I having that reaction? Did she say something that pushed one of my buttons? Wow, what's that about? Can I start to look at myself more objectively? So we have a process for this. And like anything else, this type of thing is where, here we are in adulthood, and where some of us are just becoming aware of this ability and this skill set. Uh, it's never too late to learn it. And I would encourage, you learn this, and this is how you teach your children to start to look at themselves when they come to an edge where they have that ability to do that. We teach them how to make those correct decisions.
I guess it's so hard. I feel like I'm never gonna be in a place that's stable. I mean, the thoughts are always fluctuating. The emotions are always fluctuating.
And this is why we can't rely on them. Your thoughts and emotions are always in flux. If we try to navigate our lives simply based on our thoughts and emotions, we're at the mercy of them. And whatever wind that blows, the winds of fortune come through and blow give us success or give us failure, we're going to be blowing in the wind with them. This is where that sense of humor comes in. The person who actually can sit back and say, there's me getting angry. There's me. I lost, $10 million. That's not who I truly am. I can sit back in the observer perspective, and I can look at this happening and go, yes, I'm sad. Okay. But it's not throwing me off balance. It's not shaking my sense of identity, because I know who I truly am is the person sitting in that chair observing those thoughts and emotions. Your thoughts and emotions are always going to be in flux. The self, the objective observer, is never in flux. It's not subject to those things. This is a critical skill set. Until we learn this, and some people, by the way, some people I think have found ways to do this without formal instruction. I think there are some, probably quite a few people who have said to me, I know a number of people have said to me, Doug, I do that intuitively. I can just separate myself, and I can step back, and I can look at myself and laugh at myself. And, I don't take myself too seriously. But by and large, I think the greater majority of people need a little coaching. They need a little training. Our culture should be doing this. Other cultures have done it in history. Our culture fails us here. In fact, they want us to live in that place of fluctuation, because only in that place of fluctuation can you keep selling people things that they don't need. That's what our culture is based on, selling people things that they don't need. Changing what people need, needs and wants getting confused. If you're in the objective observer perspective, consistently, if you can drop back and look, you're going to assess that need and want and go, wait a minute, I don't really need that. That's just me wanting that because I don't feel good about myself today. I feel like I don't like the way I look, or my nose looks too big, or I think this about myself. But what you're dissatisfied with are those parts of you that are always in flux, your body, your thoughts, your emotions. The self is never in flux. Probably why this skill set has not been taught consistently, because people would not be as manipulated, easily manipulated, if they consistently could objectively intercede on their own behalf. What do you think?
I agree. But I guess it's easy to say that.
Well, it takes work.
Yeah, it takes work, and
that's why we have the channel, Rob. That's why we have the channel, and that's why people.
I guess the part of the work though that's so tough is it feels like it's 2 steps forward and one step back constantly as I work through this stuff.
I think that's easy. That's a perception, because first of all, we are results oriented, results trained. We pay our money and we expect to get something back in return, with something tangible. I will say that every effort, every attempt to go through the process that I teach on this channel, every attempt to just step back, pause, step back, and try to look at yourself objectively and figure out what's throwing you off balance. Every time you try it, no matter how unsuccessful you think you are, you have made significant change. You have subtly but very significantly started to rewire your brain. Literally. You're creating a new blueprint for yourself, to look at yourself, to look at the world. You're being just a little less reactive, just a little bit more responsive, creating just a little wedge between stimulus and response. That's where those mindfulness practices come in. We talked about the mindfulness in speech. That's building a wedge. You know, whatever the decision you make, you may say whatever you're going to say, but if you ask those 3 questions we talked about, you have built a wedge between stimulus and response. You're not the same person you were 5 minutes ago because you've done that. And you have changed. You have broken a synaptic pattern in your brain. You've broken a pattern. In yoga, we call these grooves, that kind of like grooves on the old LPs, where the needle will just follow. Well, these ruts in the road or grooves in yoga are called a samskara. These patterns of behavior, patterns of responding, patterns of reacting. Once you break it with a little bit of a pause and an assessment, because you realize those 3 questions are a pause and assessment, right?
I do now.
Yeah. Okay, that's the pause and the assessment. I just stopped and I'm asking 3 questions. Now the decision I make, I may fall back and say, yeah, whatever. I still want the food, or I still want to do this. I still want the drink. I still whatever it is. But you're not the same person because you have stopped, you've paused, you've assessed, and over time, decisions will change. Decisions will become more balancing.
I think they do become more balancing, and sometimes doesn't always feel that way in the moment, but when I look back over a series of years and decisions, I'm realizing that it's more balancing.
If you learn to do what is the most balancing thing that you can come to in the moment, in the very moment, then you've ensured your future and your past. By focusing on I mean balanced action right now. How is that so? If I'm doing the best I can right now to make the most balanced decision I can, not something where I'm reacting out of my fluctuating dispositions, but I'm actually stepping back and making a decision from the authentic self, from the observer, and I make that decision now, I've ensured to the best of my ability that my tomorrow is going to be balanced. And tomorrow, I'll be able to look back on today and not regret the decision I make. So I've ensured my future and my past by simply working towards that most balanced decision right now.
Well,
does that make sense?
It does, and I guess I just keep
on plugging at it.
Keep going at it, and tomorrow Monday morning is a good time to kind of get things going in that new direction.
Absolutely. That's why we've got this. This live stream on Sunday night at this time, because it's sort of the beginning of the week. Essentially, it's to get you back in the game tomorrow. For most of us that are in that regular work week, it gets you back in the game, maybe with a little bit new perspective, maybe another tool, another way of looking at things under your belt. Maybe just generated a bunch of questions for you. This is where you can come in and watch. We're going to have our daily videos coming up very soon. I encourage you all to be looking for that. We're going to have a video every day with a little bit of guidance along the same lines of what we chatted tonight. Look for us next week at Sunday at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our live chat, our streaming live chat. And in the meantime, get on some of those previous videos that are out on the channel. Please comment on those. I get to those. I'll answer your comments in pretty quick order. And I want to thank everybody for being here this evening and joining us. And thank you for those of you that have chatted in. I really appreciate it. And once again, you also have an opportunity on this channel to go to my website, my webpage. And there once you opt in, give me your email address, you can get into a place where you get my free meditation guide, and you'll be getting regular blog posts and this type of thing. And another way for you to communicate with me with things you'd like to hear and things you'd like to chat about. So thanks again, and we hope to see you next week here on this channel.